as we know, many countries have imposed various lockdowns during the COVID-19 pandemic. And during these movements, restricted movement has meant that many more people are using e-commerce, that it's become a crucial service for consumers to access their daily needs. To see how the pandemic has reinvented shopping, we're going to turn to a panel of e-commerce experts, leaders, to better understand the changes and the future of e-commerce. That panel, which is going to happen in just a moment, moderated by Julie Verhage, co-founder of Fintech Today. She'll be joined by Adrienne, Managing Director of Consumer Discretionary Analyst at Barclays. Also, Kaeya Majmundar, the founder and Chief Executive Officer at Swaypay, and Thuy Allen, Senior Product Leader at Shopify. Now, following which, we are going to have another session that looks at what's next for the finance sector in this post-pandemic era. We'll also look at the best practices to emerge from this period of disruption. To moderate the fireside chat on this topic is Michael Milken, chairman of the Milken Institute, and he will be talking with Thomas Kurian, CEO of Google Cloud. Now let's go over to the first panel with Julie and her guests.
Hi, guys. So my name is Julie Verhage. I am a co-founder of Fintech Today. I am here to moderate a great all-female discussion on e-commerce and what the future of it looks like in a post-COVID world. So we have Adrienne from Barclays, we have Kaeya from Swaypay, and we have Thuy from Shopify. So a lot of great angles that we can cover here. Basically, I just want to start off by saying it's great to sort of end the year with an all-female panel. I don't think I've done all-male panels before, but I don't think I've ever had one that's all-female before. So finally, in 2020, we have something like this in fintech, a very still male-dominated industry too. So I love that we're kicking it off with that and get some great female thoughts in here. So Kaeya, well, let me switch to you first. Your company's still very young. You raised around this year. What was it like trying to pitch an e-commerce business in this sort of era? Like, I'm sure it was much different than what you expected when you were first sort of coming up with this idea in your head.
Sure. So I actually raised a lot more money post-COVID than pre, which was actually pretty interesting. I think a couple things impacted that. Number one, obviously the shift from in-store to online, duh. But I think the bigger thing is actually the price sensitivity and where the market is going. And are shoppers even going to shop? And if they're going to shop, like, how can we accommodate their needs on, the pressure that on their pockets right now? And I think if you look back to the 2008 crisis, for example, there were a few retailers who refused to discount their products, and they fell on their sword for it. There's like Abercrombie, for example. And so, essentially what we do is we allow shoppers to get the max discount by trading social capital at the point of sale. And so the propensity to take on this product, both from a shopper standpoint, a merchant standpoint, and a VC standpoint, accelerated for us.
Got it. Cool. So Adrienne, on your front, so you do a lot of analysis on different consumer trends, what people are doing and how they're changing their behavior. What are some of the biggest changes you've seen demographic-wise throughout all of this?
Yeah. The single biggest thing has absolutely been the shift to e-commerce. And, we can talk about from a demographic perspective, this was already happening for the past, call it a decade, and it was being led by millennial and obviously Gen Z. And I call it the e-generation movement, right? Each successive generation just gets more and more ensconced into sort of the world of growing up with an iPhone in hand. It then morphed outside of that, right, into other demographic, parts of society. And so the single biggest change really has been that everybody, I don't care whether it's, your economic level, high end to low end, older grandmas to, 5-year-old who are sitting there with an iPad, it is permeating every single facet of society. And so this whole notion that if you do not get on board now, you'll be left, the train has left the station and you'll be left way, way behind. So we are seeing in the past 6 months, 5 years of e-commerce penetration acceleration in 6 to 9 months. And so these companies really have to do, a major transformation from their brick and mortar, where all the capital costs are, and they almost overnight have to literally swap, right, what they were doing. Entering pre-COVID, we were 70%, an average retailer was 70% brick and mortar. This year, you could effectively swap that, right? And next year, when we recover, split the difference. We are never going back to 70% brick and mortar. It may be 50-50 kind of as we come out of this in 21 and 22.
Right. Tui, I'd love to get your thoughts. So you guys deal with a lot of small merchants too. What sort of, how have you guys been prepared for this? And where were some areas where you guys had to act really quickly to help out a lot of the small businesses that rely on you, even more so in 2020 than they ever thought they'd have to?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so one of the things we like to say at Shopify is that we thrive on change. So that's actually a really good thing in a time like this. And so we pivoted immediately. We are incredibly merchant obsessed and care passionately on making sure that our merchants are set up for success. And so with that, we actually introduced several new capabilities and new products very, very quickly. So just to name a few, so we introduced gift cards, right? So you have the opportunity, if you can't go out, but you really want to support a local merchant, you can purchase a gift card because that's cash flow for them and that helps them sustain operations. Local delivery, right? I think we're all experiencing and doing that. That was a new capability we launched. Online tipping so that we can really support the frontline workers who are behind the scenes. We extended our 90-day trial too, and we saw a tremendous amount of, probably folks who had been waiting for a while to make the shift online, just take that jump and take advantage of that 90-day free trial. And of course, I have to speak about Shopify Capital, which is in my area. We actually very, very quickly pivoted to extend Shopify Capital to the UK, to Canada, which we had formerly just been in the US, and we've extended 1.4 billion as of just September. So a lot of things that we pivoted very quickly to help small entrepreneurs and small businesses succeed during this really tough time.
On the Shopify Capital front, what's the average size of the loans you guys are giving out on that platform?
It varies really. So, at Shopify, we have plus merchants. So we have larger merchants and then we have very small merchants as well. So it really kind of full spectrum depending on your need and what you have and where you fall in that scale.
Got it. Okay. Kaeya, I'd love to ask you, so how does this change your plans moving forward? It seems like you deal with a demographic that is both young and older, as we were talking about pre-panel. So how do you sort of take all of these changes into account and what's next for Swaypay, since you guys are such an early company and there's a bunch of different options you can go with?
Yeah, so a couple things. We raised our money and we launched a product in COVID. And so the data that we're getting is, I'm not sure how, we're actually literally in the process of figuring out, okay, how much of this do we glean and decide what our 2021 strategy is. For example, we initially had the thesis that we're a very Gen Z friendly product and then realized that moms are absolutely bending over backwards to shop with us. And so, do we follow that trail for 2021 or do we stay diversified or do we, double down somewhere? That's one thing in terms of categorically who the shopper is. Second thing, categorically who the merchant is. So what's actually been very interesting for us is the businesses who signed up super fast for our product were businesses who were pivoting from in-store to online. And I think what's actually very interesting to me is what I didn't realize in retrospect, what should have realized was that, a platform like Shopify can certainly facilitate, or Swaypay can certainly facilitate the technology needs, but the greater needs actually come back to community and your shoppers actually driving the traffic. Going back to even what you were saying before the panel, it's how do you actually get the traffic to warrant this shift as well? Is a whole thing. It's kind of like crickets, all of a sudden, because people around you aren't necessarily going to immediately shift over online as well. So we have actually been looking at, okay, is that the kind of merchant that we go after? And if so, how do we really uniquely support that kind of merchant versus a merchant who already has transaction volume and is looking to capture more of it online?
Yeah. Adrienne, on this front, it feels like, I mean, the title of the panel is, post-pandemic, changing commerce because of COVID. But it seems like a lot of it depends on what type of retailer you are and who your customer base is, right? Like I would think some of the older demographics might be more keen to go back into store eventually. And it would depend on what you're actually buying. Like right now, a bunch of groceries are getting bought online, but I would think people eventually feel more comfortable going back to the grocery store more often and whatnot too. But how do retailers, do they just do a bunch of user research, or what sort of would you tell someone trying to figure out exactly, like, who knows how much of their customer base is going to come back to a brick and mortar versus stay online?
Yeah. So we're of the mindset that this is just a snowball that keeps rolling, on and on. And so what we've done here is we've accelerated, like I said, 5 years, and we can, condensed it into, 1 year. But I mean, there will come a time, pick 2030, pick 2050, whatever that year is, where we're going to be at, if we were 95% brick and mortar back in 2009 in the last recession, there'll be a time in the future, right? If you kind of play this whole thing out as some futuristic, kind of prognostication, there'll be a time in the future when we're going to be 95% e-commerce. And so the trick here is for a brick and mortar retailer, as you deplete and you start closing those stores because you're trying to get those sales over in the e-commerce world, what ends up happening is, these brick and mortar institutions were a form of ghost advertising, of halo advertising. And what you end up finding is that if you're going to go out wholesale, and let's say that we were 70% brick and mortar pre-COVID, and in 2021 will be 58%. That is a 30% reduction in your brick and mortar footprint. If you just go out and close those stores, the odds of you transferring those sales into e-commerce are incredibly low. You will just lose mind share and lose more and more of it. In a world where we are online, we talk about three things, right? You're going to have brand awareness, brand recall, and brand call to action. I want to go to gap.com. I need to know about it. I need to have wanted to be there. And then I actually want to desperately want to transact and give them my money, right? And that is the single biggest challenge that's going to face these retailers as we kind of move into that next kind of decade of this shift.
So some of those things that Adrienne just mentioned too, how can Shopify sort of help its merchants fix some of those issues?
Yeah, great question. I think, we really I completely agree that I think this is just like a starting point, and we're on this trajectory of this change. And so we have to continue to evolve and help merchants sort of adapt to this new normal that, will change, but is going to continue to move in that direction. Some of the things, I think omni-channel features are going to be really, really critical. And you will see some merchants trying to solve sort of, okay, well, we may have some folks who come back in store, but we're still going to have a lot of folks who have now new expectations around curbside delivery or around the ability to have goods shipped very quickly. So all of those are features that we're continuing to expand on. And one of the things that we're also doing, and we look at this as more not necessarily a shift of our focus, but actually more just expanding our focus, because there's a different level of operations and operational complexity that comes with this new world, with this omni-channel complexity that is now the new normal that everyone expects. And so really trying to make sure that we actually bring the financial operations tied to the commerce and the sales and the business operations together is one of the things that we're really focused on and feel is going to be really important for the success of this new commerce world that we live in post-pandemic. And so, that's one of the big reasons why, we're looking to launch Shopify Balance too, because bringing, again, the financials and the business operations together on one platform to simplify at least some of that sort of traditional overhead that comes now that it's going to be becoming more complex, that merchants and consumers now have these greater expectations that they can get things in so many different ways.
Right. Continuing with TUI for a second, the merchant, like the cash flow changes a lot when it's e-commerce versus point of sale. How can we expect that to evolve? Because there's different ways that people can pay online. We have buy now, pay later with you guys partnering with Affirm. There's credit card, there's debit, there's ACH, and each one has a different form of cash flow, right? So how can we sort of imagine the future of that and the behind the scenes cash flow looking in the future as well?
Yeah. So managing cash is complicated for everyone and really complicated for small businesses and small merchants. And the reality is cash is tight, in times like this. And I think that additional complexity that now this sort of overhead required to meet the needs of the new consumer expectations post-pandemic makes that more complex. And so to your point, Shopify is very, very focused on making sure that we bring some of those financial capabilities and flexibility to our merchants in multiple ways. So as you know, we introduced buy now, pay later. We're seeing significant trends moving in that direction. We also are bringing, Shopify Balance, which will enable merchants to be able to get access to their funds very quickly so that they actually can help manage their cash much more quickly and have access to it. And several other capabilities over time in terms of sort of insights, better management of their funds, helping them make better decisions, helping at point in time when they need to have capital because there's potential supply and demand challenges that they need to access because of the seasonality of their business. So that is a huge focus for us, and there's a tremendous amount of things we're doing to make sure that we help merchants be more successful at managing their cash flow and growing their businesses.
Got it. Kaeya, on the consumer side, what do you think the future of the checkout actually looks like? Because I've been paying more attention to what the checkout process looks like. You have companies like Fast trying to make it quick, one click. Shopify has a really easy way to just log in and input your information. Others are trying to do similar things. But I also wonder, there's also additional things getting added to the checkout with all these various options being added in there. So what do you essentially think the future of that looks like? And maybe if AI plays a role in figuring that out too? I'd love your thoughts there.
Yeah, so I actually think it comes down to optionality. I think that we've shifted into this world where it was always like just PayPal or just quick checkout or whatever, just one option. I don't think there's been a year that's accelerated this demand for more payment options than 2020. And I think it all comes back to really accommodating, meeting the shoppers where they are, where their needs are. And so I think, sure, there are technical implications of that and larger implications of that, but it ultimately comes down to the shopper and what they need. And so, for example, for us, this idea that there could be a social payment button, it sounds probably very alien. Like, do you really need another payment button? And for us, what we're finding, at least in our earlier stages, is that absolutely yes. And specifically for us too, it's also, with Afterpay and QuadPay, it's kind of great for the merchant because they get the shopper splits their payment in four and the merchant kind of gets the full payment up front. But it's not actually that great for the shopper if you really think about it, right? Like, you're kind of duping almost a shopper to say you're getting it for $25, but really it's 4 payments of $25 over the course of the next month, and you end up having to pay it all anyway. And when in reality, what the shopper was looking for was kind of a deal. They were looking for not to take a line of credit, and essentially that's what they did. And so, number one, I think more diversification on that, certainly checkout wars, and number two, I think continuing to put the customer at the core, and meeting their needs in particular.
Got it. Adrienne, on that front though, I would think some consumers wouldn't like having too much optionality, that they would get sort of confused and get frustrated with a bunch of different options on there. What are your thoughts on what the ideal checkout would look like? I bring up AI because maybe there's some sort of way where we can figure out, okay, this consumer usually does buy now, pay later. Let's make sure that's near the top of the checkout or something too. But you also don't want to have 15 different options, because then I can see my mom just getting really frustrated and just leaving the checkout, which is the merchant's worst nightmare.
Yeah. So totally hear you on all those points. What I would say is the payment option thing is probably going to take a little bit of time, right? So should we think about the years, like 2018, the millennial demographic became, factually the largest population group. In 2019, they became the biggest wage earners. Starting in 2020, they are the biggest consumptive power. Family formation, they're having babies, they're having kids, they're moving into homes. And so for the next 2 decades, for the next 20 years, it's all about that millennial and sort of weaning off of my mom's generation or your mom's generation. And so I think the payment option angle of it is actually going to take some time. Keep in mind that the average household income is $55,000 in the United States. And retailers that cater to that demographic, they still do about a quarter, 25 to 33% in cash and credit cards. I mean, sorry, cash and checks, non-credit. So you have to accommodate a third of kind of the average consumer and figure out how you don't extend their credit and make their financial situation worse than it currently is, but actually are able to help them, budget, frankly, right, and make this an enhancing experience for them for their financial, planning, as opposed to giving them all these options like layaway, and then I think I have 4 times as much money, and then as you said, a few months later, I'm like, oh my gosh, all these payments are coming due. So I do think it's a long, more drawn out discussion and a slower kind of grind. By the time we get 10 years down the road, the Gen Z will be coming up right behind them. And that's where I think all these alternative payments really blossom.
Right. Tui, I'd love your thoughts here. So sticking with the checkout, because it fascinates me, but so it's obviously better to be near the top of whatever the consumer is seeing than towards the bottom, I would think. But how do merchants, places like Shopify and just like a straight up merchant website, figure out how to place that exactly? Because I would think, like, is it based on like bidding? Is it based on which one's the most popular? Like, what sort of can go on behind the scenes there, and how should we expect that to evolve in the future?
So many things there. I'd say that, it is ever evolving. It is a space that I think is changing by the minute. I think there's a real connection between as a merchant, what you show on your website, and connecting it to very frictionless ways for consumers to be able to actually purchase, but also social is an angle on that too. And making sure that there's a social connection back to your potential website, your store where you're selling your goods, and making that something that is very prominent. Obviously, at Shopify, we are incredibly proud of the work we do around making sure that ShopPay and the way that you can go through that checkout experience is incredibly fast and quick and easy and simple. So there is absolutely an element of just like removing as much friction and also giving some level of optionality, but doing it in a way that is not overwhelming. So placement is important, but I think it's also a little bit probably a broader strategy in terms of how you connect sort of where meeting your consumers and where your customers potentially are, and then actually just trying to remove any friction in the process. And we actually have some interesting stats. So we talked a little bit about the buy now, pay later. And, in terms of even just what we were just talking about the demographic shifts and changes. And there's some interesting stats about, men actually are some of the more frequent users of the buy now, pay later. And many of them are actually millennial fathers. So I think this whole industry is just going to evolve so much, and there's probably a lot we can learn from. I know, at least in LATAM and South America, buy now, pay later has been something that's been very common for a long time. And it's something I think in North America is just going to continue to sort of evolve and really kind of find itself as a new normal for merchants and for consumers who prefer to pay that way.
Got it. Yeah, I kind of refer to buy now, pay later as like the first world problem of what layaway was. Like, we just want the product right away. We don't want to like pay for it and then go get it. We want it and then to pay for it. So it's just like the reverse of that, basically.
Totally.
Kaeya, I think you're the perfect person to answer this question for me. So Instagram and others have started adding commerce to their platforms, and it feels like I see a lot of backlash on that, but I feel like it's one of those things that gets backlash and then could totally take off too, because I've clicked on ads from Instagram and bought things before, even though like I try not to use the shop part of it just out of like, I don't know, hating Facebook and Instagram type part of me. But I feel like that actually will end up being a way that people shop, whether it's Instagram or just like this social aspect, as you referred to, where the moms on your platform are like, oh, like they're buying this stuff for their kids. That's a great present for Christmas. Or like this clothing line is really great, stuff like that. What have you kind of been seeing there, and how do you think that evolves in the next couple of years?
Mm-hmm. I definitely think Instagram has the opportunity to be one of the biggest shopping platforms in the world. And I think it ultimately starts at the place of discovery. Right. So that's the point, is that Instagram is a place of discovery, whether you like it or not, for so many products. I think what's really interesting, though, is when you really think about that shift all the way downstream back to currently like place of discovery is more overtly influencers, and then kind of subconsciously your friends and family, right? And then, now they're actually allowing you to check out directly in the Instagram app. It's not actually, there's still, I think, a little bit of a disconnect and a place, like a lot of work to be done there for sure. And if you actually look at the stats from massive potential for it to be both the place of discovery and the point of sale, going back to, why does Shop Pay work so well? It's because it's eliminating friction. The one thing that I do consider, even when it comes down to when I'm asked, like, well, can't Instagram do what you're doing? I think for us, like the where we truly differentiate is our investment in repatriating the value that you as a user are creating on Instagram back to you, your pocket, and creating that kind of synergy versus Instagram being just a frictionless direct point of sale opportunity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I kind of think of it as like another version of, there's a bunch of influencers on Instagram, obviously, that might get 15% back for being with like a code, and then whenever their users use it, you get some sort of commission check and stuff like that. So it's a different way of allowing more people to use that social aspect, correct?
Yeah, that, and I think there's a really interesting shift too in people wanting to own the value that they create too, right? There's like Patreon. There is plenty of these lawsuits going left, right, and center with TikTok dances. Like all of a sudden I made a TikTok dance and now everybody's doing it and I don't get anything for it. It's almost like, what we saw originally with, same thing with, high school sports players, where they don't get any of the money that they're creating, they're generating for the universities. And so I think there's also going to be a pretty big shift there as well.
Got it. I want to stick with Instagram. Adrienne, what sort of data and stuff have you been seeing that would say anything about both Instagram and just like social shopping in the future too?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the fastest growing areas, right? So I'll start with not even like 3 years ago, I'd say, like, if you were looking at the digital online, there was still the majority of it was from some sort of a desktop. As we sit here today, even in 2019, the digital piece of their business is 70, 80, 90% from a non-desktop mobile device. So, we're seeing these tidal wave shifts that occur in the span of a year. It's almost like once it becomes known and convenient, and there's a word of mouth aspect to it, as this, whether it's Instagram or any other platform, to execute the digital shopping experience. People talk about it on your TV, right? People talk about, you'll be in a bus stop and there'll be a QR code and you zing that QR code and all of a sudden you're in a shopping world, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of these things what used to sound like fantasy or sort of things that sounded too good to be true, they are now actually coming into reality. And I think that every year that we go through this, you're getting people and you're getting industries, right? Kaeya, like you've opened up an entire industry, a whole new thought process. I mean, the notion of actually paying with social, currency is so foreign, and yet, it makes so much sense. Mm-hmm. And so in the next, year or so, you can see these things taking off as soon as they are good ideas and they fix a problem and they solve people's financial kind of, tightness, in a post-pandemic world. You can just see each of these kind of taking off lightning fast. And I think that this just pushes forward into, all the minds and the education that may have perhaps been, doing real estate deals 5 years ago for brick and mortar retailers. They're now all focused on these new world, types of solutions.
Got it. Tui, I'd love your thoughts on this too, just because Shopify sort of acts as like this platform or whatnot as well. So what do you sort of see happening in the next year or two here? And you also, as we were talking about before, we have lots of moms using Kaeya's platform and you have 2 kids. So I'd love to know if you've ever used like this social aspect to sort of not like crowdsource, but like a friend of yours posted about a good gift or a good product or something that you then went out and bought.
Yeah, no, definitely. So there absolutely, I think there's a shift towards that sort of more social community oriented knowledge sharing. But I'd also say that and we actually just released the State of Commerce report last week that goes into a lot of depth on this subject. So probably a really good thing for folks to take a look at. But one of the big trends that we've seen that makes, me personally really happy is this wanting to support the local community. So not only supporting kind of the big, Instagram mega community and those folks who maybe have these influencers, but actually a real focus back to supporting maybe the small Main Street sort of, merchant who, has now gone online. And so we're trying to do our best to connect the dots. So from a platform perspective, Shopify is really working hard to make sure that the little guys have a voice and that we can make sure that this need we're seeing for individuals to want to connect and support their community and the local business in their area, be able to do that through things like, the sort of more bottom-up Shopify shop platform and ecosystem that we're developing.
Right. So I guess maybe the FTC will make Facebook get rid of Instagram, and then Instagram will go public, just like Airbnb and DoorDash, and it'll be like a $300 billion company, and it'll all be hunky-dory, right? No, thank you guys. This is awesome. That wraps up our time. The people in the chat are telling me that, but it was so nice to get to meet you guys. We've never met before. Hopefully next time it can be on a panel in person, because this was fantastic. And I'm anxious to do panels in person again eventually too. So thank you so much for taking the time today. It was such a pleasure.
Thanks, Julie. Thank you, everyone. It was great.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.